Welcome back to Kings of the North. We have actual information for you today. Lesmerises and Bill Landis with the special Monday morning reveal of a preseason Big Ten media poll compiled by Kings of the North. Our voters from across the Big Ten picked the order of finish for the 18 teams. They picked conference champs. They picked offensive and defensive players of the year. And I also asked them, who do you think is going to make the playoff? How many Big Ten teams will make the playoff? Which teams will make the playoff? And we're going to reveal that all right now on Kings of the North. And then we'll discuss what we sort of think about this. Big Ten Media Days will be taking place Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in Indianapolis. And Kings of the North will be there the whole time with interviews and interview shows. And then we'll be planning on going live on Tuesday and Wednesday night at the very least, Bill. So people need, if you're here, hey, just for the results, who are these jokers? Subscribe so you don't miss anything, because we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff from Indy this week. Yes?
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty loaded 3 days. Hopefully. Yeah, we'll see. You guys had some good luck and did some good stuff at Big 12 Media Days. I think Big 10 Media Days could be even bigger. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so let's get down to business, because, again, I've just been listening to so many podcasts lately where they dork around for 11 minutes. The reveal. 18 teams, the order of finish, no divisions. Our 33 voters picked Ohio State to finish first in the Big Ten standings this year. Number 2, Oregon. Number 3, Penn State. Number 4, Michigan. Number 5, Iowa. Number 6, USC. Number 7, Wisconsin. Number 8, Nebraska. Number 9, Rutgers. Number 10, Washington. Number 11, Maryland. Number 12, Minnesota. Number 13, UCLA. Number 14, Illinois. Number 15, Michigan State. Number 16, Northwestern. Number 17, Indiana. And number 18, Purdue. Everybody was asked to rank. There's like a little widget in the survey thing I sent people. You just slide teams up and down. You just slid teams into the order you thought they would finish. That is your predicted order of finish from the KOTN preseason Big Ten media poll. Who will actually win the Big Ten? I also asked them separately, all of our voters, predict the championship game. Who will win against who? And there was an overwhelming sentiment here. Ohio State over Oregon is by far the most popular Big Ten championship game prediction. Overall, 27 of our voters picked Ohio State to win the Big Ten this year and win the Big Ten championship game. 6 of our voters picked Oregon to win. The full breakdown: Ohio State over Oregon, 24 votes. Oregon over Ohio State, 6 votes. Ohio State over Penn State, 2 votes. And Ohio State over Michigan, 1 vote. Okay. Pretty clear. That's fairly overwhelming evidence, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. This poll that I started when the Big Ten bailed on this, I started this in 2011, then at Cleveland.com. It hasn't been great. It's not always right. So this is like, if you're not Ohio State, if you're an Oregon fan, if you're a Michigan or a Penn State or an Iowa or a USC or a Minnesota, don't give up on the season. Because what are polls? Just a bunch of people filling out a survey. What do we know? So that's the consensus on that. We'll talk about the playoff stuff a little bit later, because that's more like discussion topic. But we also did the Big Ten preseason offensive and defensive player of the year. Who is the KOTN Big Ten preseason offensive player of the year? It's Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel. We only had 32 of the 33 voters vote in this. 24 of those 32 first place votes went to Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel. He had 83 points overall. I asked people to pick 3, and then I assigned a 3-2-1 voting scale system for the points, right? So Dillon Gabriel, the overwhelming favorite. Preseason offensive player of the year, Dillon Gabriel. Number 2, Quinshon Judkins, the running back from Ohio State. He got 4 first place votes and 39 points. Again, that's 39 compared to 83. 4 first place votes compared to 24. So Dillon Gabriel kind of ran away with this thing. Quinshon Judkins was second. Number 3, Emeka Egbuka, the Ohio State wide receiver, got 16 points, did not get a first place vote, but was on a lot of ballots, was a very popular third place choice. Then we had a gigantic tie. Ties, man. We had 3 players tie for 4th with 10 points each. Again, this is 3 points for first, 2 points for second, 1 point for third. Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback, got 2 first-place votes and had 10 points. Also at 10 points, Kyle Monangai, the Rutgers running back, got 1 first-place vote and got 10 points. And then also in this tie, Travion Henderson, the other Ohio State running back, had 10 points and got 1 first-place vote. So 6 players really kind of ran away with this. There were a bunch of other players who appeared on a ballot or two. We can maybe talk about them a little bit later. I did send that information out to our voters, but they're the big ones, okay? Those are our big top 6 on the offensive side of the ball. Dillon Gabriel, congratulations, the KOTN preseason offensive player of the year. Preseason defensive player of the year. This race was much tighter, and it was won by Michigan cornerback Will Johnson. 47 total points. In this vote, 3 of the team voters did not vote, so this is 30 first-place votes possible. Will Johnson got 9 first-place votes and 47 total points. The first-place votes really spread out here. Number 2 in this race, Caleb Downs, the Ohio State safety, the transfer from Alabama, 30 points and 4 first-place votes. Finishing third, Mason Graham, the Michigan defensive tackle, 25 points and 7 first-place votes, and he is actually in a 3-way tie at third. 3 separate guys got exactly 25 points. Also in that mix, J2 Tuimoloau, the Ohio State defensive end, 25 points and 5 first-place votes. And also in this mix, Jay Higgins, the Iowa linebacker, 25 points and 3 first-place votes. And then there was another clear divide, a clear top 6 here. It's Abdul Carter in 6th place, the Penn State linebacker who's moving to defensive end, 17 points, 2 first-place votes. And then everybody else, there were guys who got named on 1 or 2 ballots, Landis, but there was a clear top 6 again. A clear top 6 on both sides of the ball. That's the information. If you've never been here, if you don't like us, if you have been here, it's like I had to stomach that Doug guy so I could get the results of this. That's it. Now we're going to discuss it, Bill. I'm going to rest my voice for a second. What surprised you the most out of everything that was revealed in our Big Ten preseason voting?
I don't know that I'm super surprised by anything in terms of like the predicted order of finish. I think the 2 most interesting things there are, did enough people in their minds think that Michigan was going to continue its winning streak against Ohio State to maybe knock Ohio State out of that top spot and perhaps bump Michigan up a little higher than people are anticipating? And it doesn't seem like that was the case based off how the standings ended up. And then the other thing was sort of how Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, I think ended up falling in the pecking order, which at this point, like I don't know that there's a right or wrong way. Like my ballot was a little different than what ultimately we ended up with, but I think you can justify really any order of the 3. And I think there is a hard line there after that group when you get to the rest of the conference. So, but the way that shook out, like none of it really surprised me. I think maybe the biggest thing that was, or the most surprising to me, was how much of an overwhelming favorite Dillon Gabriel was as a new player in the conference, like a new player on a new team. And a lot of people who maybe aren't intimately familiar with his game, or frankly have even watched him play all that much, being more Big Ten centric people, picked him by such a wide margin to be offensive player of the year. I thought perhaps that an Ohio State player, or even one of the Michigan guys, even though people don't think Michigan's going to have like a world beater of an offense this year, might have gotten more, not more attention to Dillon Gabriel, but at least more consideration than it seems like they got. Like he kind of won that thing by a landslide. And I don't know that I was expecting that.
Top 6 in our offensive player of the year voting, 3 transfers, 3 guys who are back. And the top 2, Dillon Gabriel, far and away number 1, Quinshon Judkins, far and away number 2. So it's like, hey, how's the Big Ten doing? It's like, well, the Oklahoma quarterback and the Ole Miss running back are the 2 preseason offensive player of the year leaders. That's how they're doing. It's good they're in the Big Ten. This is why this is not the preseason Doug and Bill pick show. I surprised myself with some of the things that I arrived at, because when I made my team picks, I went through everybody's schedule and I did win and loss for everybody. And then I just tallied up their Big Ten record, and that's how I got to it. Mm-hmm. And in the process of that, it's like, you think who's going to win this game? I also like, there are upsets during a year. So I pick some upsets. I pick some games where it's like, well, I think, this other team will be favored, but this is a spot where the underdog will win. So I went through that. and I surprised myself a little bit. But the idea of all this, Bill, is perception. It's general consensus.
Mhm.
It's the vibe. And so then you can be right and wrong. So people can be mad or not mad. If you don't have a poll, people can't be mad. Neil Brown, when I was at Big 12 Media Days, he was mad last year when West Virginia was picked last. He was mad again this year when West Virginia was picked 7th. He's still mad. But if there's not a poll, you can't be mad. So I do think for a lot of things here, and especially at a league where you're bringing in 4 new teams and those writers, and I'll be honest, we didn't get a ton of votes from the West Coast writers. I invited multiple. I invited like more than 60 people to vote. And we got 33, right? But we did get some. We have some West Coast votes in this. So they don't know the traditional Big Ten teams as well. The traditional Big Ten writers don't know the West Coast teams as well. But yet they arrived at Dillon Gabriel. That's all perception. That's all drop a big numbers veteran into the Oregon offense. Dillon Gabriel wasn't in my top 3. Now, that doesn't mean that I think Dillon Gabriel is bad. I think right now, I don't think Dillon Gabriel is going to be as good as Bo Nix. I think the Oregon offense will be good. I don't think it will be as good as last year. I think there's a little bit, I don't want to say overhyped. I just think that the expectations may be a little too high for Dillon Gabriel and that kind of thing. But we have to establish this, because how do I know the expectations are too high? Because he got 24 of the 33 first place votes. That's how we know. So we had to do the poll. And so I would never call anybody out for their preseason ballot, because the whole point is to gauge perception and consensus. But I am intrigued by the idea that like the whole league thinks Dillon Gabriel is going to be the best offensive player.
I think you would call somebody out for their preseason ballot, by the way.
Old Doug, maybe. Not new. Comprehensive coast to coast Doug. No, you're right.
But the other part of that too, right, is that like typically this is a quarterback conversation. And if you survey like potential Big Ten quarterback play, like it's not the best, right? It's not a league with a lot of overwhelming quarterback talent. We've talked before about like how a lot of our teams in the North, not just specifically the Big Ten, have reasons to be excited sort of beyond this year. But there's a lot of unknown with this current quarterback crop, especially in the Big Ten, or frankly, what's known is not all that impressive either. So Dillon Gabriel, as the most experienced quarterback in college football and by far the most productive quarterback of anyone who's going to start for a Big Ten team this year, probably deserves some consideration as the winner for Big Ten preseason player of the year on the offensive side. But I agree with you that I don't know that he deserves every first place vote as he nearly got here, but I definitely understand why people's minds went there, even if they're not intimately familiar with his game. Like it just sort of makes sense based off of that Oregon offense, his background, and frankly the rest of the quarterback crop.
We'll get back into some player stuff a little bit later in the show, and we're not going super long on this. I do want to talk about the idea of these preseason polls. The SEC released its preseason poll last week. Georgia was the overwhelming favorite in that poll. Georgia got 165 first place votes. Texas got 27. Alabama got 12. So that ranking in the SEC was Georgia 1, Texas 2, Bama 3, Ole Miss 4, LSU 5, Mizzou 6. I would have voted for Texas. And in the Big 12, Utah was barely the preseason pick in the Big 12 balloting. Utah got 21st place votes. Kansas State got 19. Oklahoma State got 14. So that's pretty well divided. So the Big 12 was Utah 1, K-State 2, Oklahoma State 3, Kansas 4, Arizona 5, Iowa State 6. And so the thing I just want to put out there to people, and I am not here to sow confusion today. I was trying to figure out like how could we like SEO this or like really get people's attention. And it's like big news dropping or like a drop of a poll, you know, I was like trying to like seize the moment kind of thing, right? Like there's a drop, there's a big. So anyway, I couldn't figure out how to do it. So we just read the answers to everybody. We are doing this. There are going to be 2 other Big Ten preseason polls that you're going to see this week, I would imagine. And the whole point of this, if you're new to this, if you're new to the Big Ten, if you're new to us, the Big Ten, when it went to the divisions in 2011, stopped asking the writers stopped asking the media to vote. Normally what these leagues do, 30 seconds of inside baseball, when you apply for a credential to cover a preseason conference gathering, when they grant you the credential, they also say, here's your ballot for the preseason picks. Vote for the teams. And like in the SEC, they do a full preseason team on both sides of the ball. So you're just some person from some little paper who covers one team, and they're like, all right, who do you think the best left guard in the SEC is? And you're like, oh, no, do I have to subscribe to PFF to get my credential? And you just fill it out. So you have to keep that in mind. Like, we all do the best we can do, but many of us, most of us, focus on covering one team. And then you're asked, like, what do you think of the whole league? So, like, we've never done that, but the Big Ten stopped doing that. Every other conference in the world does it. And I'm just saying this because I've said it for the previous 13 years when I've made fun of the Big Ten for being afraid to hurt people's feelings. And I said, I'm not afraid to hurt people's feelings. So when I was at Cleveland.com and they stopped, I started a preseason poll at Cleveland.com in 2011, and it has served as the de facto. I'm not even sure de facto applies here. It is the preseason poll. It's what everybody refers to. The Big Ten Network refers to it. It's on Wikipedia pages. When anybody in the Big Ten for the last 13 years says, we were picked 7th in our own division, that's because of the poll that I put together. Otherwise, there is no reference point. And sports needs reference points. That is one of the thrusts of Kings of the North. We have to understand what teams are expected to get to so we can have smart conversations about it. So they bailed on it. And I said, fine, I'll do it. And listen, did it get it got some clicks for Cleveland.com. That's great. But I did it for the league. I did it for the fans. I did it for you guys. So a year ago at this time, I was still at Cleveland.com. And I had passed that poll off to Nathan Barrett at Cleveland.com. And he did a great job with it. I was no longer the person who tallied the stuff up. And I was no longer the person who sent out the emails, but I had been like for the first 9 years of it. And then like, it was sort of like, it was still my baby, but Nathan did the work and Nathan did a great job. Now Nathan's not at Cleveland.com anymore. And I had no idea who was doing what. And we can't not have a poll, Bill, right? Like that's zero preseason poll. That was not an option, right?
No, absolutely not. No,
we had to have one. So I started to send out invites and then people were like, oh, other people are doing polls. And I was like, okay, well, no one told me. And I can't just trust somebody else will do it. I'm not a somebody else will do it guy.
Mm.
So there will be a Cleveland.com poll. Great. And now Gannett, I've been told, is doing its own poll. And so Gannett owns a lot of media properties and newspapers and websites around the country, many of them in Big Ten territory, including the Columbus Dispatch, the Indy Star, a bunch of other places. And they started it this year. I don't know if they saw an opening because they knew I left Cleveland.com or what. Nathan went to a Gannett paper. And I don't know if that was part of it. I don't know what it was. Somebody at Gannett, because I'll tell you what, 13 years ago, nobody at Gannett did squat. So like, okay, Gannett, congratulations. 13 years late. You got a poll. Woo, you got a poll. So you're going to see a woo Gannett poll. They're going to call it the Woo Gannett poll. Woo Gannett. They're a multimedia corporation. I'm a man with a legal pad. So there's going to be a Gannett preseason poll. There's going to be a Cleveland.com preseason poll. And there's a Kings of the North preseason poll. Great. And if that's confusing, blame the Big Ten because they gave it up. And it hadn't been confusing until now because it was just me. It was just Cleveland.com. It was just Nathan, right? We just did it. So anyway, that's the deal. And I don't mean to get mad about it, but I do mean to get mad because the Big Ten is so freaking stupid and afraid of its own shadow. And the guy who used to be the PR guy every year when I saw him in Indy would be like, oh, I saw you were calling us cowards again for not doing a poll. I'd be like, yep, I sure did. Because you sure are.
I like that the Big Ten had absolutely no problems destroying the Pac-12, but they can't hurt feelings by putting out a preseason Big Ten poll.
People said that Rutgers would be last. Here's your money. Here's your money. I'm sorry, 30 media people said you'd be last. How's your $52 million? It hurt our feelings. God, it's so stupid. It's just sports, people. But also, like, you need markers. You need markers in the ground. So then nobody can say, coaches love nothing more than to play like the everybody doubted us card. But if you don't have the doubt, you have to have the doubt first.
Right.
How do you know you're supposed to fire your coach if they weren't picked to finish third and now they finished 14th? How do you know? Oh, like the AD is going to be like, oh, should we, do you think we should fire our coach? There wasn't a preseason poll. There weren't expectations that he didn't live up to. So we have to keep him. I'm allowing schools to fire their coaches. So anyway, it's not my poll, but it is my poll. So that's why we did it. Okay. So let's finish the team talk here. Ohio State was a pretty overwhelming favorite. Like Oregon's right there. Mm-hmm. Are you surprised that Penn State's third, or is Penn State the logical third place team to you?
Yeah, I think Penn State is probably the logical third place team. I don't think people generally are thinking about Iowa in the same way that you have sort of expressed over the last few weeks. So maybe you can make an argument for Iowa to be that high, just based off like schedule and who they play and all that stuff. But I think like the combination of Penn State having a fairly easy schedule, if you take a second to look at it, and the idea that Michigan is probably going to take like a slight step back this year, and Jim Harbaugh's gone, and they're like remaking a lot. I'm not surprised to see Penn State third there at all.
So it was pretty close between Penn State, Michigan. It was Ohio State and then Oregon, and then a pretty sizable gap to Penn State, Michigan, very close. Then another gap to Iowa, USC. Then another gap to Wisconsin, Nebraska. Then another gap to Rutgers, Washington. Then another gap to Maryland, Minnesota. Then another gap to UCLA, Michigan State, Illinois, Northwestern. Then another gap to Indiana, Purdue. This is not the Doug and Bill preseason show. A couple things that popped out for me, we can just talk about, right? Maybe some things as we did our own ballots that surprised us, didn't surprise us a little bit. As again, I think predicting standings is different than predicting and then saying how good a team is. Like, do you sort of agree with that idea?
Yes.
Now, if you're doing this in 11 minutes before you go mow your lawn because Doug sent you another email and said, please vote, it probably is how good you think they are. I'm not expecting everybody to go through the standings, right? But I did go through the standings, and then I arrived at this is different than how good I think a team's going to be. Schedules really matter. Iowa's schedule is super doable. I wound up with Iowa at 7-2. It's super doable. I'll say it. I wound up with Rutgers at 7-2. Their schedule is so doable. There are a bunch of toss-up games, but like some of their tougher games are at home, and they have road games they can go win. I'm not going to apologize for having Rutgers at 7-2. I have Rutgers in a 4-way tie for third in my actual rankings in the Big Ten. I wound up putting them sixth because I put them last among the 7-2 teams based on how good I think they actually are. But like that kind of thing came into play. Wisconsin, I actually think could make a jump this year. I had Wisconsin at 3-6 because their schedule's really hard. And Michigan State's schedule is really hard. Like there are some things where schedule really matters here. Here's the one thing that we can maybe talk about. I have Oregon at 7-2, beating Ohio State. So I have Ohio State at 8-1. I have Oregon at 7-2 because I have Oregon losing at Michigan. But then my wrinkle that keeps this from being, and then I'm like, I think you sometimes have to look for opportunities to throw in the unexpected. Here's my most unexpected thing, which feels like a thing we'll do a whole show on once we get rolling here in Kings of the North. Oregon plays at Wisconsin when Wisconsin is coming off a bye week, like in the back 2/3 of the year. That's a danger zone game to me. Like not even a trap game. It's just like a danger zone game. I don't know if that's going to be at night or not. I think it's in November. It maybe won't be at night. If that's at night, like Oregon coming from the West Coast has never done this before, and Wisconsin's off a bye. And I think Luke Fickell knows how to coach. I gave an unexpected loss to Oregon there, which dropped them to 7-2. So it's like I have what I think of teams. I go through the schedule, but then I look for upsets. And that was one that I found that. So in the end, my final ranking was Ohio State and Penn State, both 8-1. Penn State's schedule is super doable. It is super doable. It is super doable. Whew. Both at 8-1. Ohio State would get the tiebreaker because I have them beating Penn State for Penn State's only loss. And then I had Oregon, Michigan, Iowa, Rutgers at 7-2, USC at 6-3. You want to talk about sort of like what you had for your individual standings?
Yeah, for sure. I ended up then predicting Ohio State to go undefeated. I actually may go back and forth on that throughout the build up to the season, because like it's an interesting conversation. But I ended up with Ohio State 9-0, Oregon and Penn State 8-1, and they don't have a head to head, and we are still at this moment unclear what the Big Ten tiebreakers are going to be. So I just put Oregon second. It could work out when we get those tiebreakers, and in that specific scenario, maybe it would be Penn State who ends up second. I ended up with 3 teams at 7-2: Iowa, Michigan, USC. Again, don't really know how they'll actually be sorted beyond that. I actually ended up with like a lot of sort of like clusters of teams. Actually, I had a couple teams at 6-3, including Rutgers. Like I don't think 7-2 for your Rutgers is off base on one game.
Let's get Tishu.
Different
Let's
than you.
get Tishu on this show.
Yeah, Tishu. I'm not letting
Rutgers
Tishu
doubter.
kill the Rutgers vibes.
I love him. He's a Rutgers doubter.
The weirdest thing that happened to me is I go through like my Phil Steele magazine and just put like WL and just go through the whole league and then tally it up. I ended up with 5 teams at 2-7. So, I don't know that they'll be quite that jumbled at the bottom of the league. I would imagine 1 or maybe 2 of those teams might rise from that group, but like I got to 2-7 and I was like, I'm not figuring out who is actually among these teams is actually going to be at the top and who would be on the bottom based on tiebreakers. But that made me think that like the bottom of the league, while maybe not playing games that matter much to the national narrative throughout the year, could be playing some pretty compelling games, because it feels like maybe like the bottom 5 or 6 teams in the Big Ten are all going to be pretty competitive with each other.
I do think so. Indiana 17th, Purdue 18th. I think that's wrong. And again, like I think that will be wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong now. I think that will be proven to be wrong. I think Indiana is going to give people some trouble with a couple of the transfers from JMU that followed Kurt Cignetti, and that he's a good coach. And I think they're going to have a plan. I actually had Indiana at 4-5. Would you have Indiana going?
I had them 3-6, 6-6 overall, 3-6 in the conference, but like 10th in the standings.
I actually have 2 teams going 0-9. Which was like, again, because you sort of end up going through a thing, and it's like, even if some teams have like quote easy games, then you think like, well, that's where that team's going to get a win against somebody. Yeah. So do you want to guess the 2 teams I had going 0-9? One for sure.
Northwestern.
Nope. I actually have Northwestern being decent. I have Northwestern at 4-5. I think they're going to have a home field advantage in their weird little field.
UCLA.
I had UCLA at 1-8.
Then I have no idea. 0-9.
Illinois. I have Illinois at 0-9. Okay. And I have Maryland at 0-9. I didn't love Maryland season. Go.
Because
it's just, here's the thing that happens is that like you wind up with, if sometimes you're like, you play good teams at home and bad teams on the road. And then it's like, well, now you're on the road. And like that bad team is like, our 1 win's going to be against this team. And then you're like, hey, we're at home, but all the teams are pretty good. Like it's a lot of it's just schedule. So we have plenty of time to get into this much more. We're allowed. I think you have to be definitive and real with your picks. Like you can't have, I picked this on this show and this on another show, but we have a month until the season starts. So I'm not holding myself to this, but these are my preseason picks at the end of July.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean this is where I'm going to be 100% for sure on September 1st, right?
Right. No, I think you have to allow. I don't think you're not going to like move the team you had 13th the first, but
right.
If you want to have a little bit of wiggle room at the top, I think that's okay.
All right, quick break. We're going to finish up real quick with some playoff stuff and some player stuff. Next, back on Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, the preseason poll, 33 voters. I will say this, in the Cleveland.com poll, the first 13 years of it, Bill, do you want to know how many times out of 13 the voters correctly predicted the Big Ten champion?
I would love to know. Yeah.
4. So 4. And they were like never right at the beginning. And by they, I mean me, us. Like these are my people. These are our. So let me run through it really quick. Last year, got it right. Last year, picked Michigan to win the Big Ten. Michigan was picked by 27 voters. 27 of 37 voters a year ago picked Michigan to win the Big Ten. So that was correct in the preseason poll last year. But just running through the history very quickly, 2022 picked Ohio State, actually Michigan. 2021 picked Ohio State, actually Michigan. 2020 picked Ohio State, correct, Ohio State. 2019 picked Michigan, actually Ohio State. 2018 picked Ohio State, correct, it was Ohio State. 2017 picked Ohio State. Correct, it was Ohio State. So those are the four. Michigan last year, and then Ohio State in 2018 and 17, which means the first 6 years of the poll, it was wrong. 2016 picked Ohio State, it was Penn State. 2015 picked Ohio State, it was Michigan State. 2014 picked Michigan State, it was Ohio State. 2013 picked Ohio State, it was Michigan State. 2012 picked Michigan, it was Wisconsin. 2011 picked Nebraska, it was Wisconsin. So that's why you got to have polls, so you can call out media people for being idiots. So like incredibly wrong. 4 out of 13 is not a good percentage. So if you're mad that Ohio State got picked to win the Big Ten, if you're an Oregon fan or a Penn State fan or a Michigan fan, there's a very good chance that this is wrong. Playoff teams. I asked this question, Bill. How many Big Ten teams will make the playoff? 33 voters. 21 voters said 3 teams will make it. 10 voters said 4. 2 voters said 2. I also gave an option of 5 and nobody said 5. I'm a little surprised that 4 didn't get more support, that it was 21. It was 23 voters saying fewer than 4, 2 or 3, and 10 saying 4. I said 4. How many did you say?
I said 3.
Because Notre Dame is going to be treated like a Big Ten team and take one of the spots. Is that why? We've already discussed this theory. Okay. So then within that, and again, we have time to talk about this. Will Ohio State make it? 100% of the voters said yes. Will Oregon make it? 100% of the voters said yes. Will Penn State make it? 64% yes, 36% no. Will Michigan make it? 52% yes, 48% no. So actually, that's 4 teams that got more than half, but then, right, there's people in there who I voted yes for Michigan and no for Penn State or whatever. Iowa, 9% yes, 91% no. And I also asked about USC, and it was 100% no. So that's like a pretty, if this is Ohio State and Oregon are going to make it. Penn State has a good shot. Michigan's a coin toss, and everybody else is a long shot, which I think, again, is probably the right perception right now. I think like we have stats behind, I think if you asked a person on the street, hey, what do you think of the Big Ten's playoff hopes? It would probably align somewhere along with that, right?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that the Penn State percentage isn't higher. Only because I just have a very hard time seeing Penn State being anything worse than 10-2. I guess James Franklin could pull off a 9-3. So I thought that percentage might have been higher. I'm not surprised that Michigan is a coin flip because I think people aren't exactly sure how to think of them. And I do still, like I said earlier, I think that people maybe don't have the right point of view on Iowa. A 10-win team from last year that plays a pretty easy schedule this year and has a lot back. Like, it should be higher than 9%. I'm not saying it should be a coin toss like Michigan, but I think 9% is probably not enough respect just to sort of the state of play for Iowa. I think they have a pretty good shot at it.
All right, let's talk again about the player awards. Let's just run through Offensive Player of the Year again. Dillon Gabriel 1, Quinshon Judkins 2, Emeka Egbuka 3, and then Will Howard, Kyle Monangai, Travion Henderson tied for 4th. The people who also at least got 1 or 2 mentions on ballots: Zachariah Branch, the receiver from USC, Miller Moss, the quarterback from USC, Tez Johnson, the Oregon receiver, Darius Taylor, the Minnesota running back. Both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, Penn State running backs, got at least a vote. Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback, got a vote. Dylan Raiola, the Nebraska freshman quarterback, got a vote. And Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end, got a vote. My weird ballot, and I acknowledge that it's weird, but I was like in my own head, like this. It's one of those things. I track things that nobody cares about, but I actually kind of tried to spread out my 6 picks, 3 on offense, 3 on defense, among the best teams, to be fair in my soul, in a way that nobody cares about. So my ballot was Kyle Monangai of Rutgers 1, Colston Loveland of Michigan 2, who I think is going to be the best tight end in the country and like the go-to guy in the Michigan offense, and Tez Johnson, the Oregon receiver 3, because again, I don't know that Dillon Gabriel is going to play like an All-American, but I think Tez Johnson might put up bonkers numbers. And I think the Ohio State offense is going to be like so even and spread out that I'm not saying that that Travion Henderson, Emeka Egbuka, and Quinshon Judkins, and Will Howard, and Jeremiah Smith, and like everybody that's going to be a Carnell Tate, everybody's going to be involved there. Not that they're great players, but I think they're all going to like take pieces away from each other, and they're going to spread it out. And when we get to the end of the year, it's going to be like Kyle Monangai is going to have like 1,700 rushing yards, and Tez Johnson's going to have 1,800 receiving yards, and Colston Loveland's going to be a first-team All-American tight end, and Ohio State's offense is going to be great because of a lot of guys. So I kind of fought that with my ballot, which was Monungai, Loveland, Johnson. What was your ballot for Offensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, I think your Ohio State concerns are valid. I thought about it too, but I still ended up with Quinshon Judkins first. I think he will end up being perceived as like sort of the engine of Ohio State this year. I don't think it'll be Will Howard. Could be one of the receivers maybe. And like I'm not that's not meant to be like dismissive of Trevion Henderson in any way. I just think Quinshon Judkins is going to end up kind of being the lead guy for the offense. So he was 1. Dillon Gabriel was 2. Because I think his stats will dwarf most other quarterbacks in the conference. And then I actually had Donovan Edwards 3rd. I don't think a name we mentioned. That's a little bit out there, I guess, based off of how he played last year. He was really good at the end of the year, but for much of last season, he struggled being the number 2 to Blake Corum. I base my pick off of like he is no doubt about it, running back 1, and I think he'll kind of flourish in that role. But if you want to tell me you think Colston Loveland will be the engine of Michigan's offense more than Donovan Edwards, like I certainly wouldn't fight you on that because I agree with you that Colston Loveland will be the best tight end in the country. And I will say, like, I did not consider him. I should have. Like, Zachariah Branch is a good sneaky pick because he is going to put up a boatload of production. Like, maybe on a team that's not in a playoff conversation or a team that's necessarily fighting for the Big Ten crown. But if he's the guy that ends up leading the Big Ten in most statistical receiving categories, I wouldn't be surprised by that. So that was a good smart pick, I think.
Defensive Player of the Year, I actually voted Jay Higgins of Iowa number 1 because I think he's going to be a tackle machine for Iowa, and I think Iowa's going to be led by its defense and will just be so. I think he'll be like Manti Te'o light of I'm the quarterback of the defense. The defense is the reason we win, and so I get the deserved accolades from that. Like, does it mean that I think Jay Higgins is going to be like the highest drafted defensive player of the Big Ten in the NFL draft next year? No, but I'm just trying to think that way. Number 2, I had Caleb Downs from Ohio State because I think at that safety position, I think he's going to be the guy who pops among a load of Ohio State defensive talent. And again, how do you, I really thought about voting for Denzel Burke. You know, I considered Jack Sawyer. I mean, there's just so many guys, but I thought Downs will be the face of that defense. And then I voted Abdul Carter of Penn State 3rd because you said you think he's going to lead the nation in sacks. It's stuck in my head. And I left off Will Johnson and Mason Graham of Michigan, who both might go in the top 5 of the NFL draft. And I felt like a lunatic doing it. But again, I think there's some part of it that Michigan has so many good defensive players. I'm not saying that I voted the right way. A lot of people voted for Will Johnson and Mason Graham, obviously. I felt bad not voting for them, but I think there's like a clear top clump of superstars in the Big Ten. And I think, you know, any of those 5 or 6 guys, if you land on 3, I think you're in the right range. Who'd you vote for?
I had Abdul Carter 1 because I do think he's going to lead the country in sacks. I think he'll be the defensive player who pops the most in the conference. Caleb Downs was 2nd for me. I think if your view on Ohio State's defense is that like JT Tuimoloau is like the guy, I think that's wrong. Not that he's a bad player. I think that is. I don't know what that is. That's you watched the Penn State game from a couple of years ago too many times, or you're just banking on recruiting pedigree. But I think it's more likely to be Caleb Downs or a Denzel Burke or a Jack Sawyer than it is JT. But I had Caleb Downs 2nd, and I had Jay Higgins 3rd. I did not I considered Will Johnson, but I also think that Will Johnson's so good the teams aren't going to throw the ball to his side of the field.
Exactly. What are going to be the stats that are going to have people voting for him? He still might be an All-American, but it's going to be because he had didn't allow any catches.
Yeah, he just is the best corner in the country, right?
He just exists.
Do you know? Do you know the last time the defensive back won Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year?
Charles Woodson.
Close. Mike Doss, 2002.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And it's been a corner specifically hasn't won it since 2000.
Okay. Yeah. So that's. I mean, people. I mean, it's like people like sacks and tackles. I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
So I voted for the tackle guy. You voted for the sack guy. So and again, Mason Graham is going to be a monster. Great. Mason Graham is going to destroy pockets, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to shut down running games. He's a defensive tackle. It's just hard.
Yeah. I mean, a tackle, Jerzon Newton won it last year. So it can be done, but I also I don't know. I know Michigan is not as deep at defensive tackle as it was last year, but is Mason Graham going to play 600 snaps or is he going to play 350 snaps?
Yeah.
And then if the answer is 350, then I don't think he can win Big Ten Player of the Year.
And I do think, again, we're dealing with perception here. We're trying to like guess perception almost and like guess numbers. If we were being NFL GMs, it's like, right? We'd be fighting over Will Johnson, Caleb Downs, and Mason Graham.
Yeah.
Right. If we were playing, be an NFL GM. And if we were playing on the offensive side of the ball, be an NFL GM, we'd be fighting over Jeremiah Smith, like at Ohio State. Like, it'd be like, okay, I don't know what you want. I don't think he's going to have 100 catches as a true freshman, but like, so it's just, we're doing different things here. So, but you try to think, I really tried to think of engines, right? So like Tez Johnson as an engine, you said Quinshon Judkins as an engine, Jay Higgins as an engine. Like, I think you tried to think of that and tried to apply it in certain ways. And so we laid it down, we put it out there. That's what it is. And away we will go. Is there anything else about the preseason ballot that we need to say here before we let the good folks get on with their lives and remind them that we will be at Big Ten Media Days with excellent Big Ten coverage on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday?
Yeah, only that whatever player list you see from the Big Ten, like officially during the week, is just a list of like players who are good. It's because they also don't want to pick players of the year or any kind of first team, second team. It's just like list 6 players who you think are good at football. So that list means nothing.
And I think they release it and they say, this is a list of good players. It doesn't mean if you're not on the list that you're not good. You can still be good and not be on the list, but these players are also good on the list. You know what? Everybody's good. Everybody's good. Try your best. Go Big Ten. So I'm very curious about this, and I've talked about this. I want the Big Ten to seize the moment. I want them to grandstand. I want them to make news. I want them to thump their chest. I want them to not back down. I want them to challenge the college football world. I want them to come out and be the story. And I want their goal to make Big Ten Media Days as much of an event as SEC Media Days are. And if they don't, I will ask everybody I can find associated with the Big Ten why they're not doing that. Because in this new battle of North versus South, of Big Ten versus SEC, and the Big 12's over here doing their thing, you have to think about that. It's not the most important thing, but it is important because it factors into perception. This is the perception time. And it just permeates. And a lot of people say, oh, we shouldn't have preseason polls because it affects the committee. I think the committee picks the best teams, but there are things that happen in your subconscious, right? So SEC bias is there because the SEC does this all the time. And the Big Ten has some really good football teams. And if they do not get out there and pound their chest in Indianapolis this week, first, I will pound my chest on behalf of them, and then I will pound them for not doing it. Let's go. If we're going to be the North, let's be the North. Let's not back down. I hope Tony Petitti gets up there and for 9 minutes says, how great is it to be in a room with players from the 2 teams that played in the national championship last year? Right? Yeah. Let's pound chests. Let's make stories. Let's be proud. Come on, let's do it. All right. And here's our poll. Here's what we did. Here's our part. Gave you something to talk about. Purdue got picked last. My feelings are hurt. Ryan Walters is fine. Because you know what Ryan Walters can do? Go 7-5 and point back to this poll and talk about how stupid everybody is and his team overcame it. Awesome. I am here for people to say how stupid I am. And I've been here doing it since 2011. All right. He's Bill Landis. Our great producer, Mike Yarosowski, got all this stuff gathered up and together and got these graphics ready in a short amount of time. Please join us this week at Big Ten Media Days. We would love, if you're a new watcher, if you're a new listener, if you've been around and you're easing in, like it's go time, right? It's go time. Big Ten Media Days. We'll all be there. Thanks to Mike Yarosowski. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.